Roberto Montero's mansion was so imposing, it seemed like a fortress isolated from the rest of the world. From the outside, white columns, perfect gardens, and security guards at the entrance gave an impression of power and wealth. But inside, what dominated was not grandeur, it was silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that felt more like a state of mourning than a home. This was where he lived with his daughter, Isabella, just 8 years old, who had been diagnosed as blind from birth. A widower since the girl's birth, Roberto carried an invisible burden of guilt. He believed that he had somehow failed his daughter and his wife, who had passed away too soon. The powerful businessman, who commanded million-dollar meetings, transformed into a weary, vulnerable man inside his own house. What pained him most was Isabella's expression, her eyes always still, lost in nothingness, as she hugged the same worn-out teddy bear. The routine was mechanical. Doctors came and went. Therapists were hired and dismissed. Eye drops were applied every day. Nothing seemed to change. The little girl barely spoke, rarely smiled, and spent hours sitting by the large living room window, as if she was searching for something beyond the darkness imposed upon her. It was in this setting that Marina, the new housekeeper, arrived. She was 27, with a past marked by losses and pain she never spoke of. Her gaze was serene, but there was a silent strength in her demeanor. Unlike the other staff, she didn't try to be overly friendly or show pity for the girl. She simply greeted her respectfully and went about her tasks. On her first day, Marina noticed details that would have gone unnoticed by anyone else. As she dusted the living room furniture, she saw that when the curtain was pulled back a little, a beam of light passed through the space and fell on Isabella's face. The girl, who had been motionless, blinked strangely. It was a long blink, almost as if she were reacting to the brightness. Marina froze. Could it have been a coincidence? An involuntary reflex? Or was there something there that no one else had noticed? She didn't say anything to Roberto. She knew a desperate father might cling to any hope and then be even more disappointed. But that night, lying in her simple backroom bed, Marina scribbled on a piece of paper. 3 words hammered in her mind: light, window, blink. Across the mansion, Roberto watched his daughter fall asleep. Silence still reigned, but there was something different in the air, almost imperceptible, as if a small crack had appeared in the invisible walls of that trapped life. The millionaire didn't know it, but in that house on the verge of waking up, destiny was beginning to change. The next morning, Marina woke up early, even before the other staff were stirring. She set the breakfast table, tidied the rooms, and then discreetly headed to the living room where Isabella usually stayed. The girl was there as always, hugging her teddy bear sitting by the large window. The sun timidly entered, creating a golden line on the marble floor. Marina said nothing. She just discreetly pulled the curtain, opening the space a little more to let the light in. Her watchful eyes never left Isabella. And then, the same long blink as the day before happened again, accompanied by a slight movement of her head, as if the girl had sensed the direction of the glare. Marina held her breath. This was no coincidence. Determined to go further, she returned later with some cardstock she had improvised during her break. She cut out simple shapes: a circle, a square, and a triangle, all in black on a white background. She knew she couldn't force anything, so she simply sat on the rug a few steps from the girl and placed the circle in front of her. Without saying a word, Isabella didn't react immediately. Silence reigned, broken only by the distant sound of a bird in the garden. Marina waited motionless until an almost imperceptible detail occurred. The girl's eyes moved slightly in the direction of the sunlit cardstock. It wasn't a perfect focus, but it was something. Marina's heart pounded. Later in the kitchen, Roberto came in to get a glass of water. He seemed distracted, tired from work calls. Marina took the opportunity and asked in a low voice, "Do you always use these eye drops?" Roberto confirmed with a nod, explaining that the vials had been used since his daughter's birth, as per the doctor's instructions. He said he never questioned it, because he believed they were necessary. Marina didn't press the issue, but a doubt began to burn in her mind. What if those eye drops were hiding more than they revealed? That night, before sleeping, she took out the paper where she had written her first notes and added new words: shapes, reaction, doubt. Meanwhile, Roberto, alone in his office, looked at an old portrait of his deceased wife. He thought about how life had become a routine of frustrated attempts and broken hopes. He didn't know it, but at that very moment Marina was writing the first line of a discovery that could change everything. The silence of the mansion was no longer the same. There was something new, a thread of curiosity, a spark of hope. It was as if Isabella had taken a small, almost invisible step toward the world everyone believed was inaccessible to her. Before we continue this story, remember to subscribe to the channel and comment with your name and the city you're watching from. Marina couldn't sleep that night. She tossed and turned in the simple bed in her back room, listening to the mansion's silence as if it were speaking to her. The images wouldn't leave her mind. The long blink, Isabella's head tilting, her eyes that seemed to follow a shadow. Did no one ever notice? Were the doctors wrong? She thought. The fear of imagining things battled with the need to confirm. The next morning, the routine was normal. Roberto left early for a meeting, and the other staff were busy with their tasks. Marina took the opportunity to approach Isabella with more courage. She brought a small flashlight she kept in her bag, hidden among her belongings. She sat in front of the girl, keeping her voice calm. "Isabella, is it okay? I just want to try a little something, okay?" The girl didn't answer. She was still hugging her teddy bear, with the same distant expression as always. Marina took a deep breath, turned on the flashlight and directed the beam of light gently, passing it lightly in front of the child's face. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Marina almost gave up. But then Isabella blinked twice, quickly, as if she were bothered. The housekeeper's heart raced. Marina repeated the movement, now more slowly, creating a line of light that crossed the air. And it happened again. Isabella's eyes followed the trail with a minimal but real movement. It was at that instant that something unexpected broke the silence. With a fragile, hesitant voice, Isabella murmured, "I think I saw a light." "Mommy!" Marina froze. The word mommy pierced her heart like a blade and a hug at the same time. Isabella had never called anyone that before, had never used that word. Tears threatened to fall, but Marina held them back. She held on because she knew this was the most important moment of her life and of that little girl's life. Before she could say anything, the living room door opened forcefully. Roberto entered with a rigid expression. His eyes went straight to the flashlight in Marina's hands. "What do you think you're doing to my daughter?" he yelled, his voice filled with anger and fear. Marina tried to explain, but she didn't need to. Isabella, for the first time in years, got up and ran, not to her father, but to Marina. She clung to Marina's waist with all the strength of her little arms. Trembling, she repeated in a low voice, "I saw a light." Roberto was paralyzed. For years, he had believed his daughter would never react. Now before his eyes, she was speaking, moving, seeking someone. The foundation of his life began to crack. The impact of what happened in that room echoed through the mansion for the rest of the day. Roberto, who had always been firm and controlling, seemed disoriented. He paced back and forth, muttering disjointed words, as if trying to convince himself he wasn't going crazy. "She spoke, she ran," he repeated. Marina, for her part, remained silent, respecting the father's turmoil, but inside her heart was burning. There was too much evidence that Isabella was not completely blind. That night, after a long silence, Roberto called Marina to his office. His voice no longer had its previous harshness. "From now on, stop the drops," he said firmly. "I want to see what happens without them." Marina nodded, didn't argue, didn't thank him. She simply held that decision as a key to the next step. Deep down, she already suspected there was something wrong with those vials. The next day, while tidying the bathroom pantry, Marina found an old wooden box, tucked away behind little-used towels. Inside were several vials of eye drops, with labels yellowed by time, and almost erased instructions. There were dozens of them, dated from previous years. The name of the doctor stamped on each prescription was always the same, Dr. Salazar. She didn't recognize the technical terms on the packaging, but she knew they weren't ordinary drops. She wrote the names on a piece of paper, intending to research them later. It could be just a treatment, but it could also be the key to a mistake or something even more serious. Later, Marina conducted new, discreet tests with Isabella. She opened the curtains earlier, let sunlight flood the hallway, and placed a simple object on the floor. Each time the girl reacted a little, moving her head, reaching out her hand, furrowing her brows. Small gestures that, to those who believed in an absolute diagnosis, were miracles. Roberto watched from a distance, stunned. The man who had spent years living under the shadow of guilt now saw before his own eyes signs that his daughter might have been deceived. "How did I not notice any of this?" he asked himself, feeling crushed. At night, alone, he locked himself in his office with the vials in his hands. He stared at those bottles for hours, as if they were silent culprits. Deep down, he was afraid to admit that he had trusted doctors too much without ever questioning them. The weight of this omission gnawed at him. Meanwhile, in her back room, Marina carefully noted each of the girls' reactions in a notebook. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a silent promise that no matter what, she would discover the truth. And with each page written, the mansion, once suffocated by silence, began to show signs of life. But along with this hope, a risk also arose. If a secret was hidden there, someone somewhere might want to keep it buried. The next morning, Marina took advantage of the moment Roberto was locked in his office to use her hidden cell phone, sitting in her simple room. She typed the names of the compounds she had copied from the eyedrop vials into the browser. Her heart pounded as if she were committing a crime, just by seeking information. With each result that appeared, her unease grew. What she found was not a simple medication to lubricate eyes or relieve allergies, as she had imagined. They were substances used to reduce intraocular pressure, typically applied in specific and severe cases. But there was more. In medical forums, some people reported that in high doses and with prolonged use, these medications could affect the pupil's response to light. In other words, they could simulate or worsen symptoms of blindness. Marina let the phone fall onto the bed for a second, taking a deep breath. Her mind swirled with questions. Was Isabella really born blind? Had all those years of eye drops kept her a prisoner of a darkness that wasn't hers? That afternoon, while tidying Isabella's room, Marina performed a new test. She left the window open, allowing the morning light to flood the space. Then she placed 3 toys on the rug: a colorful ball, a red toy car, and a yellow plastic duck. Without giving any instructions, she just watched. Isabella hesitated for an instant, but then extended her little hand toward the ball, as if she had sensed its presence somehow. The gesture was small, but it was enough to give Marina goosebumps. Roberto came in at that moment. His tired eyes widened at the sight. He stood still, speechless, watching his daughter touch the ball with a shy smile. A smile he hadn't seen in years. "She chose it?" he asked, his voice trembling. Marina just nodded. "Yes, she's reacting." That night, Roberto couldn't eat dinner. He paced back and forth, repeating that he had trusted doctors, that he had never questioned, that he might have made the biggest mistake of his life. The guilt crushed him, but something he hadn't felt in a long time was also being born in him: hope. Marina, on the other hand, felt a mix of excitement and fear. If something was really wrong with those vials, it wasn't just a medical mistake. It could be a scandal, and she knew that the bigger the secret, the greater the resistance against anyone who tried to reveal it. As Isabella slept, hugging her teddy bear, the house seemed to breathe differently. The silence was no longer just mourning. Now it was the silence that precedes a revelation. In the following days, Marina maintained her routine of observations. Each morning was a new chance to discover something about Isabella. A simple ray of sun seemed to open invisible doors for the girl everyone had believed was condemned to darkness. Roberto, though still in shock, began to watch more closely. He would stand silently at the door, watching Marina conduct small exercises. With each of his daughter's smiles, his eyes would well up, but there was something that wouldn't leave Marina's mind. The name stamped on the vials: Dr. Salazar, the doctor who had attended Isabella since birth. Why only him? Why every year was it always the same signature, the same vials, the same formulas? During a break, Marina ventured to ask Roberto about him. "Do you still have contact with the doctor who took care of Isabella?" Roberto looked up from his newspaper, sighing deeply. "Salazar? No, I haven't seen him in a long time. After my wife died, I trusted him completely. He told me that Isabella had no hope, that there was no surgery, no treatment, just the eye drops to provide a minimum of comfort." There was a heavy silence. Marina swallowed hard. The way Roberto spoke was not that of a convinced man, but of someone who had given up the fight. That night, in her simple room, Marina went back to her research. She discovered vague mentions of old lawsuits involving Salazar's name. Nothing very concrete, but enough to set off an alarm. He seemed to be a doctor who had disappeared from the spotlight, someone who preferred to stay in the shadows. One morning, as she crossed the hallway, Marina overheard two staff members talking in low voices. "Have you noticed how the little girl is walking differently?" One said. "Better not comment. The boss doesn't like questions. And besides, if the doctor finds out, we'll be in trouble." Marina stopped dead in her tracks. "If the doctor finds out?" That phrase gave her shivers. How could someone who no longer frequented the mansion still be feared inside? That day, Marina stayed even closer to Isabella. When she said goodnight, the girl suddenly rested her head on Marina's lap for a few seconds. It was a simple gesture, but for Marina it was like a silent confirmation. There was trust between them, and with that trust came the responsibility to protect. Roberto, on the other side of the house, looked at the vials on his office table as if they were evidence of an undeclared crime. In his heart, something was beginning to change. For the first time, he wondered if he had been deceived all this time. And as the clock struck midnight, the name of Dr. Salazar echoed in both of their minds, like a shadow about to re-emerge. Marina could no longer look at the eye drop vials without feeling a tightness in her chest. The more she thought, the more her conviction grew. There was something wrong, but she needed proof, something concrete, because hope alone would not sustain this fight. One afternoon, while organizing the main bathroom, she noticed a deeper shelf, hidden behind old towels. When she pulled one out, she found a small wooden box similar to the one she had seen before. Inside, dozens of empty vials dated from past years, all signed by the same doctor, Dr. Salazar. The dates ranged from Isabella's first months of life to just a few months ago. It was like a silent history of a never-ending treatment. Marina knelt on the cold floor, holding those bottles as if they were evidence of a crime. How many years were stolen, she thought. She put one of the vials in her apron pocket. She couldn't leave it forgotten. That night, when everyone was asleep, she discreetly turned on the dim light in her room and searched her phone again. She found medical articles that discussed the compound used in the drops. Some reports mentioned that in extreme cases, prolonged use could reduce light sensitivity and even induce symptoms of functional blindness. Marina put her hand to her mouth, startled. What if Isabella had never been completely blind? What if all this was the result of a wrong or manipulated diagnosis? Meanwhile, Roberto was alone in his office, staring at old photographs of his wife. Her memory crushed him. He remembered his conversations with Salazar, how he had accepted his word without question, as a final sentence. Now the guilt seemed to grow like a shadow inside him. The next morning, Marina tried something new. She sat with Isabella on the living room floor, placed 3 large cards with simple shapes and waited. The girl, hesitant, passed her hand through the air, but then her eyes moved subtly toward the triangle, illuminated by the sun coming through the curtain. "Do you see anything, Isa?" Marina whispered. The answer came in a whispery voice. It's shiny." It was enough to give Marina shivers. This was no longer a coincidence. It wasn't her imagination. It was a fact. That night, she wrote in the notebook where she had been recording everything. Day 12, Isabella reacted to the triangle. Said she saw shine. Vials indicate continuous use for years. Something is hidden. When Roberto read these notes that Marina had finally decided to show him, his heart sank. For the first time, he faced the possibility that not only had fate been cruel, but that someone, a doctor he had trusted, might have stolen his daughter's sight. Outside, the mansion remained surrounded by high walls and iron gates. But the real prison was inside, in the drops that fell every day in the eyes of a child who might never have been blind, as everyone had believed. Marina knew she couldn't keep this to herself for long. Every day that passed, every small reaction from Isabella to the light reinforced her conviction that something was wrong with the treatment prescribed by Salazar. But how could she prove it? How could she confront a renowned doctor who had been treated as an authority for years? One night, after everyone had retired, Marina took out her phone and scrolled through her old contacts. Her fingers stopped on a name she hadn't seen in a long time. Luciana, a former colleague from her time as a nursing assistant in a clinic. Luciana was now finishing her ophthalmology residency. If anyone could help her understand those mysterious vials, It was her. She sent a short message, but one filled with urgency. "I need to talk to you. It's important. It involves a child." The response came shortly after. They agreed to meet discreetly at a cafe in a nearby city. Marina would make up an excuse to leave, while Roberto was in a meeting. On the appointed morning, Marina hid one of the vials in her purse pocket. Her heart pounded as she went through the mansion gates, telling the security guards she needed to go buy cleaning supplies. The driver's car dropped her off downtown, but from there she walked alone to the meeting spot. Luciana greeted her with a surprised hug. "It's been years," she said, smiling, "but your message sounded desperate." "What's wrong?" Marina took the vial out of her pocket and placed it on the table. "I need you to tell me exactly what's inside here." "Seriously, Lou? It's about my boss's daughter." Luciana raised her eyebrows, turned the glass vial between her fingers, read the almost erased inscriptions and frowned. "This medication in small doses can be indicated for ocular pressure, but here," she paused, looking again, "the dosage is much higher than usual and prolonged. This can inhibit the response to light." Marina swallowed hard. "So she might not be completely blind." Luciana took a deep breath. "If she was born with some limitation, these drops may have made everything worse. I can't say for sure without tests, but something here doesn't smell right." The words were like hammers in Marina's mind. Suddenly her intuition was no longer just a suspicion. It had a foundation. Back at the mansion, walking through the heavy gate, Marina felt the weight of a secret that was becoming dangerous. Roberto didn't know about her outing, or about the vial she had analyzed, and somewhere Salazar's name remained a shadow. As Isabella slept hugging her teddy bear that night, Marina realized that she now had an inevitable choice. Either she revealed everything to Roberto and faced the consequences, or she continued the investigation alone, risking being discovered. Roberto spent the day restless, pacing back and forth, reviewing contracts, taking calls, but his mind remained fixated on the image of his daughter, smiling as she touched the colorful ball. It tormented him and at the same time rekindled a hope he had buried years ago. When Marina entered his office that night, he immediately noticed she was hiding something. "I need to speak with you, sir," she said firmly. "But I ask that you listen to me to the end." Roberto rested his heavy arms on the desk. His eyes were tired but attentive. Marina took the eye drop vial from her bag and placed it in front of him. The businessman stared at the glass as if it were a cursed memory. "I took this vial to a friend, a doctor in training. She analyzed it and said the dosage is extremely high enough to affect the response to light." Marina took a deep breath. "Do you understand what that means?" Roberto remained silent, but the clenching of his jaw revealed the fury growing inside him. "Are you saying my daughter might be able to see?" he asked, his voice almost failing. "Perhaps not perfectly, but yes. I can't confirm without tests, but something was very wrong all these years." Marina lowered her voice. "The name on all the vials is always the same, Dr. Salazar." The name dropped into the room like a bomb. Roberto stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. He walked to the window, breathing heavily. His fists clenched. "I trusted him," he murmured. "I trusted him like family. He told me there was no hope, that Isabella would never see anything, and I accepted it." Marina approached him slowly. "You didn't know. You did what any desperate father would do, but now the reality is before us. It's not too late." Roberto turned back, his eyes watery for the first time in years. "If this is true, he stole years of my daughter's life, years that will never come back." The silence that followed was broken only by his heavy breathing. Finally, Roberto ran his hand through his hair, distraught. "We need proof, Marina, not just suspicions. I want the truth, no matter what it costs." She nodded, feeling the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders. For the first time, she was not alone. Now a millionaire father, devastated but willing to face everything, was by her side. In her room, Isabella slept peacefully, unaware that at that very moment, a silent war was being declared against the man who had condemned her to darkness since the cradle. After that night, Roberto was no longer the same. The weight of the discovery seemed to have stripped away his armor as a cold, calculating businessman. In the following days, he spent hours poring over old files, folders forgotten in locked drawers, reports of Isabella's appointments. Marina helped him as best she could, organizing papers, separating test results, and noting dates. Each document always bore the same name, repeated like a sentence: Dr. Salazar. In the dead of night, Roberto typed the doctor's name into search engines. What he found made him even more uneasy. There were vague mentions in old forums, rumors about diagnostic errors, stories of families who never got answers. No official articles, nothing concrete, just erased tracks. It was as if someone had made an effort to hide that man's past. "This is no coincidence," Roberto said, showing Marina the computer screen. "He disappeared. No one knows where he is. No one talks about him directly." Marina took a deep breath. People like that don't just vanish for no reason. When there's too much silence, it's because there's something big behind it. The next day, she decided to investigate discreetly herself. She called Luciana, her doctor friend, and asked her to sound out colleagues in the field. The response was quick. Some professionals remembered Salazar, but they all reacted with caution, as if they didn't want to talk. One even said in a low voice that there were rumors of unauthorized experiments in the past. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Isabella showed more and more small reactions to light. She would stop in front of the window, turn her face when Marina turned on the lamp, and even smile when she saw reflections on the marble floor. For Roberto, each gesture was like a knife in his heart, of both joy and pain. Joy to realize that his daughter might be waking up to a new world, and pain for having believed for so many years that there was no alternative. At night, he would lock himself in his office, lost in memories. He remembered his wife who had trusted Salazar so much. He felt like he was betraying her memory, as if admitting the charade was also admitting he had let everything slip away. Marina, on the other hand, felt a growing determination. She was no longer just a housekeeper. She was the only one who truly saw Isabella as more than a diagnosis. In silence, she promised herself that she wouldn't rest until she exposed the whole truth. And so, the two began to join forces. Roberto used his contacts discreetly, asking for information from trusted colleagues. Marina continued to note each of Isabella's reactions in her notebook, like a diary of discoveries. Both knew they were only scratching the surface of something much bigger. Deep down, there was a certainty that united them. If Salazar had hidden something about Isabella, she probably wasn't the only child involved. The investigation was no longer confined to the walls of the mansion. Roberto, even exhausted, used his connections discreetly. He called old business colleagues who had contacts with private hospitals. He asked indirectly. He sought any mention of Salazar's name. Most said they didn't know. Others changed the subject. The silence surrounding the doctor only increased his suspicion. It was Marina who took the first concrete step. In one of her conversations with Luciana, she received information that gave her shivers. There was another family in a neighboring city who had also questioned Salazar's treatment. Their son, an 8-year-old boy, was showing strange symptoms after years of using the same eye drops. In the same week, Marina and Roberto went discreetly to that family's house. It was a simple neighborhood, far from the suffocating luxury of the mansion. They were received by a woman with a tired but firm gaze named Teresa. Her husband, Mauro, joined them shortly after. Both hesitated before speaking, but when they heard Salazar's name, their suspicion immediately turned into complicity. "Our son Davi," Teresa began. "He was born with vision problems, but nothing that prevented him from distinguishing shapes and light. Salazar said the eye drops were necessary, that they would help preserve what he had, but over time he got worse until he was practically in the dark." Roberto felt the ground give way beneath his feet. It was like hearing Isabella's story in another voice. "Did you confront the doctor?" he asked in a low voice. Mauro nodded. "We tried, but he disappeared. He vanished suddenly without explanation. We went to other specialists, but none of them understood how Davy's condition had regressed so quickly." Marina exchanged a silent look with Roberto. Now they knew. This wasn't an isolated case. As they left Teresa and Mauro's house, the silence in the car was heavy. Roberto kept his hands firm on the steering wheel, but his expression was one of contained fury. "He didn't just destroy my daughter's life," he said, gritting his teeth. "He did this to other children. How many more?" Marina, with her notebook on her lap, noted every detail. She knew those stories were more than a coincidence. They were pieces of a dark puzzle that was beginning to come together. Back at the mansion, Isabella was waiting for them with a calm expression, sitting by the window. Roberto watched her and felt his chest burn. He understood that fighting Salazar was not just for justice, it was for all the children who had been silenced. And at that moment, as night fell, Roberto made a silent promise. He would not rest until he ripped the mask off the doctor who had stolen the light from the lives of so many families. The following days brought new attention to the mansion. Roberto and Marina had discovered they weren't alone. There were other families with stories linked to Salazar. But this revelation didn't come without consequences. That night, as Marina was washing dishes, the kitchen landline rang. On the other end, a low, threatening male voice said only, "Stop digging or it will cost you." The call ended before she could respond. Marina stood still, her heart racing, feeling a cold sweat trickle down her neck. A few hours later, Roberto received an anonymous email. The subject line simply read, "Protect your daughter." In the body of the message, there was an old photo of Isabella at the mansion window, as if someone had been watching her from outside. Roberto slammed the laptop shut. His breathing was ragged. "They're watching us," he told Marina, his voice filled with anger. She tried to stay calm. "That means we're close to the truth. No one threatens when they don't have something to hide." Even so, the fear spread through the house's corridors. The staff began to whisper, commenting that there were strange people lurking around the gates at night. One of the security guards swore he had seen a black car parked for hours on the deserted street in front of the property. Roberto immediately increased security, but it didn't ease the suffocating feeling that they were being hunted. Meanwhile, Isabella, oblivious to all the tension, continued to show small progress. She could now distinguish yellow from blue on colorful cards that Marina used in her exercises. Her smile, when she got it right, was a light in the darkness of those threats. But her every progress only reinforced the weight of the conspiracy. If the girl was reacting, it meant that someone had indeed kept her vision limited for years, and that truth was too dangerous to remain hidden. That night, Roberto locked himself in his office. The fury etched on his face left no doubt. "They think they can intimidate me." He punched the desk, sending papers flying. "But they won't silence my daughter again." Marina approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "We need to be careful. It's bigger than we imagined. It's not just Salazar. If he did this, he didn't do it alone." Roberto stared at her for a few seconds, taking a deep breath, and then nodded. For the first time, he realized that Marina was not just an employee. She was his closest ally, the only one capable of facing this with him. In the heavy silence of the mansion, a decision began to form. They would not only investigate, they would expose the whole truth, even if it meant putting their own lives at risk. After the threats, Roberto and Marina knew they could no longer rely only on intuition. They needed formal proof, something no newspaper, judge, or doctor could ignore. The eye drop vials were the key. Marina kept some hidden in her room, wrapped in a cloth as if they were dangerous relics. On a cloudy morning, she handed one of the vials to Roberto. "We need to get this analyzed at an independent laboratory. If they discover the exact formula, we'll have concrete evidence." Roberto agreed immediately. Using his influence, he managed to set up a meeting with an old friend, a respected chemist at an institute in the capital. He was a discreet, trustworthy man, but even this step seemed too risky. On the agreed-upon day, Marina insisted on going with him. Roberto didn't argue. They left early, carrying the hidden vial in a leather briefcase. The driver drove down the quiet road while Roberto constantly checked the rearview mirror. There was something strange. A black car seemed to be following them from the moment they left the city. "Do you see that?" he whispered to Marina, without taking his eyes off the mirror. She discreetly turned around. The vehicle kept its distance but never disappeared. Her heart raced. "They know we're going after the truth," she said in a whisper. Roberto ordered the driver to turn down a secondary detour, a dirt road lined with trees. The black car hesitated for a few seconds but then followed. The silence inside the limousine became suffocating. Finally, when they reached a gas station, Roberto told the driver to pull in suddenly. The black car sped straight past. It was only an instant, but it was enough to confirm what they already knew: they were being pursued. Marina held the vial against her chest as if it were her own life. "They're going to try to stop us before this evidence becomes public," she said, out of breath. Roberto ran a hand over his face, trying to compose himself. "Then we need to be faster than them." They arrived at the laboratory a few hours later, tense but determined. The chemist received the vial with care and promised detailed analysis. "Give me a few days. If there's something wrong here, I'll find out." Back at the mansion, the atmosphere was heavy. The security guards had again reported cars lurking around the property. Isabella, knowing nothing, played with the colorful cards Marina showed her. Her innocent laughter was a painful contrast to the silent war surrounding the family. That night, as the wind beat hard against the windows, Roberto and Marina had the same feeling. Time was against them. If they didn't act fast, not only the truth but also their own lives could be erased. 3 days after they dropped off the vial, the phone in Roberto's office rang. On the other end of the line, his chemist friend's serious voice left no room for doubt. "You need to come here. There's something you need to see with your own eyes." Roberto hung up without saying anything. He just looked at Marina, who was organizing papers on the table. "It's today," he murmured. "We're going to find out what was really inside those vials." The trip to the laboratory was silent. Every mile they drove felt like another weight on both their hearts. Marina kept her hands clasped in her lap, praying silently that this wasn't just a mistake. When they arrived, they were taken to a simple room with white walls and a table covered in reports. The chemist placed one in front of Roberto. "These eye drops are not conventional. They contain a substance called cyclopentalate, but in absurdly high concentrations. This formula used for so long could simulate functional blindness." Marina put her hand to her mouth, shocked. Roberto stared at the paper as if it were a death sentence. "Are you telling me my daughter wasn't born completely blind?" he asked, his voice choked. "I can't guarantee her initial condition," the chemist replied, "but I can guarantee that these drops given daily could reduce any light perception or ocular response. In practice, they would turn partial vision into darkness." The silence that followed was dense, almost unbearable. Marina felt her eyes well up. She remembered every shy smile from Isabella when she recognized a ray of light. This was proof that her intuition was right. Roberto, for his part, was shattered. He ran his hand through his hair, then punched the table. "He deceived me. For years he said there was no hope. I accepted it." His voice broke. "They stole my daughter from me." Marina approached and placed a hand on his arm. "You didn't know, but now we know the truth and we are no longer alone." The chemist handed them a folder with the official reports. "With this, you have proof. Now it's a matter of deciding the next step." Back in the car, Marina held the papers against her chest. Roberto stared fixedly at the road, but his mind was somewhere else. In the past, on every night, he let Isabella believe the world was only shadows. "I won't rest until I destroy him," he said firmly. Salazar won't continue to destroy lives. And for the first time, Marina believed that this battle, no matter how dangerous, now had a defined path, the search for the truth. Roberto believed the evidence would be enough. Official reports, chemical analyses, testimonies from other families. Everything seemed as solid as iron. But they soon discovered that meddling with Salazar's past was like poking a hornet's nest. 2 days after they returned from the laboratory, the first blow came online. An anonymous article appeared on a sensationalist news portal, accusing Roberto of neglecting his daughter for years. The text said he had ignored medical advice and refused experimental treatments, painting him as a cruel father who preferred to hide the girl in his mansion. "That's a lie," he yelled, throwing the tablet against the table. Marina read the article from beginning to end. The narrative was too convincing, filled with distorted details. Anyone who didn't know the truth would easily believe it. It was clear someone was trying to turn public opinion against them before the real complaint came to light. That night, Marina received strange messages from an unknown number. First, vague phrases. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into." Then, direct threats. "If you open your mouth, you'll never see the sun rise again." She showed them to Roberto and his fury exploded. "They want to silence us with fear. But we won't back down." Still, the pressure mounted. Newspapers began to replicate the false accusations. Social media profiles spread rumors about Roberto's alleged business errors. Even Marina was attacked with comments insinuating that she was inventing Isabella's progress to gain attention. The weight of it all began to be felt inside the mansion itself. The staff, once silent and loyal, started whispering among themselves. Some asked to leave, fearing the family was involved in something bigger than they could imagine. And in the midst of the storm, Isabella continued to make progress. She now recognized simple colors, saying firmly, "This is yellow, this is blue." Marina smiled at each achievement, but inside she carried a growing fear. If they failed, if the smear campaign was stronger than the evidence, all their effort would be useless. One night, while putting the reports in a locked drawer, Marina looked out the window and saw a car parked on the other side of the street, its headlights off, but the silhouette of someone in the driver's seat was visible. She felt her heart race and ran to Roberto. "They're out there, watching." He got up immediately, but by the time he reached the window, the car had already left. The silence left behind was even more threatening. The message was clear. No matter where they were being watched. Roberto took a deep breath, his eyes full of determination. They want war. They'll get war. Roberto was exhausted but not defeated. After the threats, smears, and shadowy figures around the mansion, he decided he couldn't wait any longer. It was time to make everything official. Marina agreed. The case could not be limited to hallway whispers and reports hidden in drawers. They needed to expose Salazar and hand the evidence over to the proper authorities. The next morning, they went discreetly to the public prosecutor's office in the capital. They brought a thick folder with them, filled with lab reports, medical records, copies of prescriptions, and the chemical report that confirmed the irregular formula in the eye drops. Each step to the building was heavy, as if the ground was trying to pull them back into silence. They were received by a young prosecutor with a serious look who listened attentively. Marina spoke first, recounting her observations of Isabella, her reactions to light, and the simple experiments that revealed something hidden. Then Roberto described the years of blind trust in Salazar, the unquestioning diagnoses, and the shock of discovering the truth. The prosecutor took meticulous notes, and at the end said firmly, "What you have brought here is serious. We will open an investigation, but know that it won't be easy. There are major interests involved." Roberto and Marina exchanged a silent look. They had already expected this. In the following days, they began to notice that the weight of the complaint was spreading. Some of Roberto's contacts started to avoid him. Meetings were cancelled without explanation. Business partners who had once received him with open arms now responded with a palpable coldness. The influence of Salazar, or whoever was protecting him, still echoed in powerful corridors. At the mansion, the tension grew. 2 staff members suddenly resigned, citing personal reasons. One of them, before leaving, whispered to Marina, "Be careful, you have no idea how many people that doctor knows." Despite the fear, Isabella continued to be the lighthouse in the middle of the storm. With patience, Marina showed her colorful cards, toys, and even objects from the house. The girl was identifying more and more colors, more and more details. One night, she pointed to Marina's yellow dress and said, smiling, "It's like the sun." Roberto watched the scene in silence, his eyes welling up. This was living proof that they were right, but victory seemed distant. Days after they handed the documents to the public prosecutor's office, a new attack came to light. Newspapers began to publish that Roberto was being investigated for tax fraud in his companies. The news spread quickly, tarnishing his reputation. Marina held the newspaper with trembling hands. "They're trying to turn everything against us." Roberto took a deep breath, clenching his fists. "Then we'll go all the way. If they want to destroy my image, let them try, but I won't stop until Isabella gets justice." The complaint to the public prosecutor's office seemed like a spark in the darkness. At first, Roberto and Marina feared that everything would be silenced, shelved by greater forces. But a few days later, something unexpected happened. They began to receive calls from strangers, families who had also been Salazar's patients. The first call came from a mother named Renata. Her voice trembled on the phone. "My son used Salazar's eye drops for 4 years. He said it would help strengthen his eyes, but my boy only got worse until he could barely see anything. I never understood why. When I saw the report about you, I knew I wasn't alone." Marina noted every detail, feeling her heart tighten. It wasn't just Isabella. It wasn't just Davy, Teresa, and Mauro's son. There were more. In a few days, other families appeared. Parents from different cities, each with a similar story. Confusing diagnoses, repeated prescriptions, mysterious eye drops. The pattern was clear. and each new testimony reinforced the conviction that Salazar had done much more than make an isolated mistake. It was a network of neglect, perhaps even corruption. Roberto organized all the contacts into folders. His office, once dedicated to million-dollar businesses, now looked like a makeshift justice headquarters. Maps, documents, reports, and phone numbers covered the desk. Marina spent hours listening to the family's stories, consoling, guiding, and gathering evidence. Meanwhile, life at the mansion was changing. The once silent corridors began to echo with voices, visits, discreet meetings, and people who had been quiet now found the courage to speak. There was an atmosphere of fear, but also of unity. Isabella, without understanding the gravity of it all, watched the movement around her with curiosity. In her own way, she realized that something was happening. One late afternoon, seeing Marina and Roberto talking to a tearful family in the living room, she approached and said quietly, "Do they have sad secrets too?" Marina knelt down, holding her hand. "Yes, but now they are no longer alone." Those words resonated deeply because that's exactly what it was. The silence was being broken, but with each new voice that was raised, new threats also came. One of the fathers reported receiving an anonymous letter at home, warning him to be quiet if he loved his son. Another said he was followed to work. The fear was real. Even so, Roberto felt something different in the air. For the first time in years, he wasn't carrying the burden alone. Now there was a chorus of united families, and a chorus was much harder to silence than an isolated voice. That night, sitting next to Marina in the office, Roberto said in a low voice, almost like an oath, "Salazar may have stolen years from my daughter, but now the web of lies he built will collapse." The day dawned strange and heavy, as if even the sky sensed that something was about to happen. Marina was preparing coffee when she heard her phone vibrating non-stop on the table. It was notifications, dozens of them, from news portals, messages, and missed calls. "What's going on?" Roberto asked, already reaching for his device. On the screen in huge letters was the headline, "Children used in illegal tests. Complaint against Dr. Salazar gains momentum." Roberto's heart pounded. He opened the article. The text included excerpts from lab analyses, family testimonies, Isabella's story, and even statements from parents who had remained silent for years. The truth was finally out in the open. The news spread like wildfire. TV news shows aired reports, radio stations commented on the case, and on social media, Salazar's name was repeated with indignation. Hashtags demanding justice began to trend. At the mansion, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists wanted interviews. Families sought support. Lawyers offered help. Marina, stunned, tried to organize the chaos while Roberto remained silent by the window, watching the movement at the property gates. "It's starting," he murmured, his voice filled with a mix of relief and fear. But the exposure also brought dangerous reactions. On the same day, an anonymous account published false documents, suggesting that Roberto had paid doctors to alter reports. Another article insinuated that Marina had invented Isabella's improvement to gain fame. The lies tried to mix with the truth, creating confusion. "They won't stop," Marina said, holding the printed sheets with the false accusations. "But now we are no longer alone." In fact, the public wave was in their favor. Hundreds of comments defended the families, sharing similar stories. Emotional videos circulated with parents' testimonials, showing their children, some still with irreversible sequelae. Society was starting to demand answers. Meanwhile, Isabella, unaware of the scale of the battle, was taking giant steps. That afternoon, holding a yellow pencil, she managed to write her name for the first time in crooked letters. Isabella. Marina cried when she saw the paper, hugging the girl tightly. Roberto, standing next to them, couldn't hold back his tears. It was as if that small victory was the confirmation of everything they were fighting to prove. That same night, a TV crew managed to get exclusive images of the mansion. They filmed from a distance, capturing the figure of Roberto, walking in the garden next to his daughter and Marina. The scene quickly went viral, portraying not only a complaint and scandal, but also hope and reconstruction. Roberto knew the war was far from over, but seeing Isabella smile as she pointed to the moon and said, "It's white," he felt that for the first time, he had a real chance of winning. Months after the first headline, the courtroom was packed. Families, journalists, lawyers, and the curious squeezed into the seats. Salazar's name, once respected, was now synonymous with fraud and cruelty. In the defendant's box, the doctor kept his gaze down, trying to hide from the collective fury. Roberto and Marina were present, standing firm, although the weight of those months had marked their faces. Next to them, Isabella held her teddy bear. She didn't fully understand the grandeur of what was happening, but she knew it all had to do with her story. When the prosecutor presented the official reports, the seized vials, and the testimonies of families from different cities, the room plunged into absolute silence. The evidence was irrefutable. It wasn't a medical error, but a scheme. Years of illegal experiments funded by shadowy interests. Salazar was convicted. Prison, definitive revocation of his medical license, and multi-million-dollar fines to the companies involved. A verdict that made those present applaud with a standing ovation. Marina felt her eyes well up and squeezed Isabella's hand. Roberto, in turn, took a deep breath, as if a weight accumulated over decades had been lifted from him. Outside the courthouse, journalists swarmed, but instead of Roberto, it was Marina who spoke. Her voice, calm but firm, echoed through the microphones. "The truth won't give our children back the time they lost, but it can prevent others from suffering the same. We fought for justice and it won." Her speech was broadcast across the country. Marina was called the woman who saw beyond the darkness. Her courage became a symbol of resistance and compassion. At the mansion, now transformed into a home full of life, Isabella continued to surprise everyone. She knew colors, read simple words, and even helped organize her own things. The once silent room was now filled with drawings taped to the walls. Houses, flowers, people holding hands. One night, as she was getting ready for bed, Isabella snuggled into Marina's lap and said quietly, "I'm not afraid of the darkness anymore, because I know there's always someone who believes in me." Marina hugged her tightly, letting the tears fall. Roberto watched from the doorway, moved, realizing that it wasn't just his daughter's vision that was being reborn, but his own hope. Isabella's case changed lives. Other families found the courage to file complaints. Doctors were investigated, and new laws were created to protect children from abusive experiments. Salazar's name became an example of corruption, but also of how the truth, even belatedly, can triumph. In the end, Roberto understood something he would never forget. Money can buy comfort, but it cannot buy the purity of an illuminated gaze. And Isabella, with every smile at a discovered color, proved that the greatest wealth was always the truth. If you like this story, please like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos.